Good afternoon. When I was told I was going to be doing a talk in the breakout room, this is not what I envisioned. The Rockstar lights are something else. But thank you for joining us. I guess thank you for joining me. Both those of you who are in attendance and those online. If you can't, I'm getting feedback. Am I too close? If I stand over here, can you hear me fine? Yeah? Okay. Perfect. Thank you. Figuring out how to use the fancy clicker. So my name is Merlin Chatwin. If you can't see me from the lights, my big head's on screen. I'm with Open North. We're a Canadian nonprofit based out of Montreal, but we are fully remote, so we are across the world, in fact. And we've been around since 2011, really focused on open data and recently sort of evolving into do a lot of work in open smart cities and the data related to smart technology, data governance and digital strategy, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like. Sorry, I'm just trying to figure out how to use all the systems here. There we go. And we recently redid like an organizational strategy, and one of the things we landed on was this focus of the common good. And to us, that means like prevailing past the short-term considerations and the interests of individuals and organizations, and into what is the long-term, what is the good of the commons. And this really influences the work that we do and influences who we do it with. So the starting point for today, not bearing the lead, data governance for local climate action. Our starting point was last year, 2022, published a research paper on integrated climate action. And this really was our first step into the space. And we took that step humbly, recognizing that there's a lot of organizations, a lot of individuals who have been in this space, both in the supporting of local municipalities, but also those in the environmental justice space. And our step was saying, we're not here to try and displace anyone or say that things are not going well because of those in the space, but we have a certain perspective that I think adds value, and that we can add complementary skills to those who have already been in the space, especially as we start to see the increasing talk about data, digitization, other technologies, and their impact on climate. To us, there's a gap, and that inclusion of data governance is fundamentally important. Oh, I messed that up. Okay, now I can go. So just a little bit of context, and this is not exhaustive, but just to set the scene a little bit. Canada, warming twice as fast as the global average. Some will say it's because we started because we're so cold. 3 times faster in the north, and not achieving federal climate goals, and these goals were not overly strong to begin with. Climate events increasing in frequency and intensity, right? We just need to look at some of the fires, our fire seasons, flooding, the scope of these we're dealing with all the time. And then some of the resources, like we said, it's not like nothing's been happening. There's a lot happening. There's a lot of federal discussion about it, some support. Our Smart City Challenge work, which I'll talk about a little bit later, has really shifted from smart cities for general urbanization to smart resilience and smart technology for resilience. And then why local matters, and none of this, again, is new information, but again, helping to set the context. And one of the things I like to point out is this rural-urban connection and how critical it is to climate action, and you know, truly comprehensive view of climate, and why it's important to work across jurisdictional boundaries, right? We look at agriculture being emissions intensive, agriculture happening in rural areas primarily, consumption, you know, happening in urban areas primarily. And so any work at climate action requires that there's interjurisdictional work. And so some local governments have both rural and urban within their jurisdictions, and sometimes it's split. And so it's just a reminder of why we need to focus on the local level and why Open North has chosen to be there. And you know, especially looking at small and mid-sized municipalities and those with vulnerable communities. And so again, last sort of piece of context setting and very important to Open North is this challenge of equity. You know, our very real experience of the effects of climate change is disproportionately affecting vulnerable and marginalized communities. These communities have least access to resources, right? We're thinking, you know, air conditioning during heat waves and living in flood-prone or risk-prone areas, but then also structurally underrepresented in government decision-making. And so you're both the most affected and have the least say. And this really needs to be forefront when we're looking at how do we do climate action in Canada. So given some of Open North's experience in the space, since 2018, we've been the lead technical advisor for the Community Solutions Network. It's a program funded after the Smart City Challenge that some of you will remember. Comes out of what was formerly known as Infrastructure Canada until yesterday, I think. And it's housing and infrastructure and community, something like that. I will, in my deck, still refer to it as Infrastructure Canada. I apologize for that. But throughout the time that we've been leading this, you know, it really shifted from a focus on smart technology for urban administration and really into the focus of how does smart technology impact climate resilience. And just like a focus on smart technology for urban issues administration, there's a lot of, you know, a lot of it is vendor-led, and a lot of it is finding a problem for an existing solution. And so that energy continues into the smart climate action work. So we've been in this space for a number of years, and we've really witnessed the growing emphasis on climate change. We've done some work around you know, local flood risk mapping, stakeholder mapping, and really just how do we do better with data? How do we access data with cities? So, you know, we've been working with the City of Montreal on their data governance, their external facing data governance around 3 different data hubs: social, transport, and food security. And out of that work, because that is at the nexus of civil society and the local government, started to emerge this issue of climate, right? Because climate impacts transport, food security, social issues. And so through support and the vision of the Montreal Climate Partnership, we started looking at this idea of a climate data hub. And originally it was like, okay, let's do a dashboard, right? Let's have some way of visualizing different sources of GHG emission data. And as we started to create the roadmap about what it would take to get there, we started to recognize that the layer below, the data layer, was really where the work needed to be done. You could put a dashboard on top of it, no problem. but the focus needed to be at the data level. And what that meant was fostering collaboration and looking at ways to, and I'll talk about this a little bit more later, but intersectoral data collaboration has been tough, and convincing private entities to share data around emissions, and often it's the emissions that they're causing, is a tough sell. But I'm working on another adjacent project around transportation of goods, and one of the conversations I had last week was that there is becoming an openness, and people are recognizing that the data collaborations and sharing of data is going to help people be more efficient. So there are beginning to be some incentives that are recognized around data collaboration. And so then if the conversation is shifting from, okay, it's not happening because the private sector is not interested in sharing, to, okay, maybe there are some situations where the private sector is interested in sharing, and this is where we get this blurring of the open versus closed dichotomy. Sharing doesn't mean that we're opening it. Do cities have the infrastructure, the ability, the capacity to then host and provide controlled access to that data? So the conversation begins to shift when you start to have the potential for open or for intersectoral shift, changing. And that's not to mention like interjurisdictional data sharing, right? And then even step back, like we still have issues with data sharing amongst departments in local government. So all of those really fun, if you're nerdy, issues wrapped up into one really cool project. The other piece of it is that the infrastructure needs to be replicable, right? So looking at open source, trying to make sure that once we've figured out a lot of these issues, that we can take that and adapt it to communities across Canada. So out of these these projects that we're starting to do, and this shift in focus and this emerging alignment and need for data and technology within the climate space, we started to do research on the climate action plans, the municipal climate action plans. And that's a whole research project, a whole 30 minutes that I won't get into now. But there was a couple of really interesting things that come out. One is that there's been a real shift from first wave climate action plans into second wave, and that it's hard to find a municipality that doesn't have a really robust climate action plan right now. That doesn't mean that they're being implemented or that the resources are there or the capacity is there, but it is well understood that it is a need at the local level. So here's some other themes that come across. Data, the open data movement, of which Open North was a big part early on, was really about pushing government to open the data necessary to make decisions for community and to drive civic participation. And what we're finding now is that government doesn't have the monopoly on data anymore. Data that is necessary for decision making is not exclusively within the purview of government. And so, anecdotally, what we're finding is that local governments are even having to purchase data to measure the effectiveness of their climate action work. That's a problem. I can't see you very well, but I would anticipate that you're nodding. That's a problem. And there's a lack of a natural incentive. There always has been a lack of natural incentive to share private sector data. And then climate issues do not respect jurisdictional boundaries, right? We know this. And so these are the, data sources need to evolve. When we're looking at doing comprehensive climate action, data sources need to evolve. Ownership needs to be dealt with. Access needs to be dealt with. The second theme, and these are sort of artificially constructed themes that I tried to make pretty into a slide deck, but the mitigation to resilience. So first wave climate plans were all about GHG emissions reductions, have very much followed the language of federal government, and so carbon neutral by 2050, certain cuts by 2030, all of these targets that we're missing. And now what we're seeing is that we're recognizing mitigation is not going to cut it. We're a little late, and so there needs to be adaptation planning. And so we're starting to see the incorporation of adaptation planning. However, the resources aren't necessarily there. The standards or the milestones aren't necessarily there, and so it's a bit more ad hoc. And so what we're seeing sometimes now is that this mitigation plus adaptation equals resilience equation that some do, we're starting to see that emerge sometimes, but sometimes it's still disconnected. And then cross-departmental, again, a lot of climate action plans were done in the climate action department, the climate or the environmental department, with very little input or responsibilities outside of that centralized unit. And now we're starting to recognize that that is absolutely not going to cut it, and that this needs to be integrating data from all different sources within the city. Cities are not homogeneous units. There's a lot of heterogeneity. And then the other piece that I wanted to make sure that I mentioned was that, cities now have climate plans, they have digitization or smart city plans, they have data strategies, and they're all siloed, right? So we found very few instances where there is cross-referencing between data strategies and climate action plans, between digitization plans and climate action plans. And so we're starting to see conversation of data and technology and climate action plans, but that sits aside from their digitization, digital modernization, whatever the plans are called at the local government level. And so what's happening, again, in this theme of cross-departmental is that data standards, how people are evolving to the different landscapes and data management approaches are organically developing in silos. And while that helps, for this initial growth, it creates and the practices are geared towards that individual department or that use case, that need, and are not necessarily transferable across the department. And so, again, not bearing the lead, this data governance. This is the spot for data governance is one of the things we say is that data governance is happening already. The way you govern your data is happening. It's happening informally. Often it's happening without being named, but the way that data standards are, the way that data sharing happens or doesn't, all of this is happening informally. And so the key for us is that you have data governance that is more grounded and, as we say, in a clear set of values and explicit goals. And so data governance can be a data governance strategy for the city of, or a data governance strategy for climate action within the city of, or that it just needs to be defined as to what you're doing, why you're doing, who's making the decisions, who's involved. And the data governance strategy needs to incorporate all of these other conversations we're having of interjurisdictional, multiple orders of government, intersectoral, cross-departmental. All of these conversations are wrapped up. And so for us, we need to make sure that data governance is not just about compliance, right? Just having another strategy is not going to cut it, but that it's really geared towards how rebalancing power and who has the data, who's collecting, who's using, who's it talking about, how are they involved. Oh, epic fail. We just released this yesterday, this paper. So if I was super QR code friendly, I'd have a QR code on there so that you could go and find it. But if you just go onto the internet, it's there. And it's I don't know, we call it a research brief. It's really just quick hitting. Here's some of our thoughts right now from some of the research that we've done. And this is all preliminary research that we are using to apply for social sciences, humanities, research council, like SSHRC funding and sort of bigger research funding so that we can have some more literature-based recommendations as we move forward. So here's, I have no idea how much time I have left. I lost track, but nobody's leaving, so we're all good. And the non-questions of the last one makes me afraid of asking for questions because it wasn't a lot of volunteers. But anyways, so recommendations, closing, if we're bridging the gap between digitization and climate action, we propose it's data governance. And this conversation is rapidly evolving. We don't have all the answers, but we've separated our focus on data governance into these 3 areas. So data management. One of the things that we've always talked about, when we used to get hit up a lot to do open data portals, when we're talking about smart city technology, we often, and now AI, we're often saying, okay, let's take a step back and where are you with data management? What's the data capacity, data maturity that exists? So, collecting, where's it coming from? What are your sources? Consistency of metadata, data analysis, are you using it, right? Like, one of the things that we find now is that there's a lot of data that is not being used, not being analyzed, and so, figuring out where our data is, who has it, and how it's being managed is a pretty fundamental first step for anything that we do. And so it's not the sexiness of putting out an open data portal or running AI predictive analytics, but it's actually the foundation for all of it. And then we talk about data collaboration, intersectoral being the big one. And the way that we do this is by looking at use cases. So I give you the example of the Montreal Climate Partnership and the Climate Data Hub. One of the preliminary use cases will be transportation data, right? So we can really scope it. We can figure out what the data architecture needs to look like, how we can manage some access controls, how we integrate open with not open data, how we integrate data with different ownership and different sources while still respecting sovereignty, building in privacy and cybersecurity from the beginning. You can't do that with, maybe some people could, but I can't do that with this huge, unending sort of domains and themes of data. So you start small with a use case. Begin to formalize data governance practices. Again, here I say between sectors, but formalize data governance internally as well. And then, use cases. And then external support. Again, it's not like there's no support out there. It's there. It's emerging for adaptation and resilience work. It's emerging for data and technology work. But the networks are there. And I think that's the key message is that, working interjurisdictionally, learning from each other and not having not replicating things that have happened, not having to relearn all of the lessons, but being able to share and creating networks to do that. So finally, wrapping it up, nice, tight bow. We defined integrated climate action as a strategic approach to sustainability initiatives that involves multiple actors within and across sectors, jurisdictions, and domains, okay? So just that's the summary of what we've been talking about. So quickly, sectors, it depends on innovation in public, private, academia, philanthropy, civil society, and social movements. Jurisdictions, right, no boundaries. Climate doesn't respect boundaries. Multiple orders of government. Action at the local level is important, but it requires support. And then domains. We've got emerging projects in transportation and housing, public health, agriculture. All of these have climate implications, apologies. And so the domains need to be worked across, silos need to be broken down. And so then this integration requires data collaboration, right? Data collaboration requires data governance. It's not the only answer, but it's a piece of the puzzle. Thank you very much. Apparently the mic is working, so if it's silent, it's because you're choosing that.
If you have a question, just move in.
Hi, I decided to give you a question, but also
Appreciate it.
When you talked about data sources, you didn't mention researchers at all, and you're based at a university. So I was wondering if you could elaborate on why you don't consider research a data source. Thank you.
The audience that I'm speaking to. So yes, it's absolutely one of our big applications that we recently submitted was CFREF, which is a research application based out of Concordia, and that is a huge source. And again, speaks to the need for access controls, because the data that comes out of academic institution often has academic licensing, which is obviously different, and so. They're a big part of the ecosystem. So it just was when I'm speaking to academia, I emphasize them, and if not, I don't. Thank you for that, though. Appreciate it. As a recovering academic, I appreciate it.
Hi there, my name is Jeff. I'm from Statistics Canada, and more of a comment as much as anything, the challenges that you're describing in terms of building these hubs and having a data infrastructure are exactly the same ones that we're going through right now at Statistics Canada, particularly when it comes to data governance. I really think that is an area that needs to have an awful lot of work. I think that more and more we're realizing that the sources of data in order to solve these complex problems, well, they're housed all over the place. And from metadata to permissions to confidentiality to ownership to all of these sorts of things is something that I think that we're going to have to really work to grapple with. And so if you're interested in this, I mean, I encourage you to reach out to StatCan for the people working in your fields, because we're grappling with this directly at Stats, and I think that we're looking for ways that other people are solving these problems, and hoping to provide some support as well. But it was interesting to note that it's exactly the same thing that we're facing there.
Yeah, I mean, we have a couple projects with the federal government, and the federal government is not one to let you talk about the projects that you're doing with them very often. But it's the same message, and it's the same approach. Right, the use case approach is really the same thing. I remember having a conversation about data governance with TBS a couple of years ago, and they're like, let us support you to do data governance use cases at the local level so that we can bring those lessons up. And it's true. It doesn't necessarily need to be at the local level, but it needs to be at a really small and discrete size so that those lessons can then be scaled. And not all lessons can be scaled, but if you start with some concrete lessons, and then you can see how they adapt. Cool. Thank you.